Some people have been bold enough to predict the end of private car ownership. Whether that's the future we face or not, there's clearly something going on, and our relationship with mobility is shifting gears. Join us over the next 45 minutes to find out more. Hi, my name's Joe.
And I'm Nina.
And if you've been living under a rock, then let me tell you, something is changing in the world of transport and mobility, whether it's electric vehicles, new apps, on-demand services, drones, or of course, we all know about self-driving cars, which grab so many headlines every week, it seems, in the tech and mobility space. So during this Disruptive Innovation Festival session, we're going to delve into this topic with two experts in the on-demand and autonomous vehicles space. First up, it's Rasmus Lindholm. He's the Director of Partnership Development, Communication and Advocacy at ERTICO ITS Europe, which is a partnership of over 100 companies and institutions involved in the production of intelligent transport systems. Also on the line is Paul Godsmark. He's the CTO at the Canadian Automated Vehicle Centre of Excellence, and he's an internationally recognised thought leader on this topic and the socio-economic impacts of autonomous vehicles. Paul also plans to retire in a fully automated RV and travel around North America following the weather, and we'll maybe ask Paul in a few minutes if that is actually feasible, and we can delve into a bit more on his retirement plans.
Great.
Unfortunately, Rasmus and Paul couldn't transport themselves to be in the studio with us today, so we've got them joining virtually. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Obviously, you watching at home as well, you're not in the studio with us either, but we'd like to feel your presence in a way by sending in your questions, thoughts, comments, and insights for our great panelists. There are two main ways that you can do that. You can use #ThinkDiff on Twitter. We'll have the lovely Colin Webster, who you've seen elsewhere at the Diff, looking out for those tweets and sending them to Anina and myself to use throughout the session. The other way to send your comments in is through the comments box. It's just below the video that you're watching us on now. So use your MyDiff account, free account, takes 2 seconds to set up, and then you can add your comments in there as well. There's also a secret third way to interact.
What's that, Joe?
Well, I'm going to keep that on the down low for now, but if people stick around, maybe towards the end of the session, they can find out about a very exciting way to get in touch and have some fun at the Diff.
Great.
On to the session now. Rasmus, I'm going to start with you. So, in the past few years, and if you do go on read magazines like Wired or Fast Company, New Scientist, people seem to be envisaging this city of the future in which all transport is automated, it's self-driving, we need less roads, less car parks, a much more human-centered city. Is this really what the future holds? And if so, where are we on the transition to that utopia?
Well, Joe, first of all, thanks for having me on the show today. I think it's great that we put some focus on this specific topic. Yes, I've also seen the magazines. I've also heard the voices and read the articles. I think there is something to it. In the industry where we work, there is a lot of experiments with autonomous vehicles, different levels of autonomous vehicles, and I think definitely that's the way where we're heading. In terms of whether we will actually get to the fully automated city where people have autonomous vehicles on demand, I think that's still a bit far in the future. But in terms of the on-demand mobility, I think we've seen in the last 2-3 years a really shift in the way that transport is carried out. Another buzzword or hype, if you will, is called mobility as a service, which is similar to the mobility on demand. And basically that takes you away from car ownership to car usage. But what it also does is that it integrates all different modes of transport. So the picture you have to have in mind is a little bit like your cell phone. You have a subscription with a mobile phone company today. wherever you travel in Europe, you can use your cell phone, you have data roaming, you can send SMSs, you can go online and do whatever it is that you do. It's the same principles that we're trying to apply to mobility of the future, hence the mobility as a service. So literally, you would have a local subscription to mobility as a service where you can use buses, trains, bicycles, or cars when you need it locally, but that would also apply when you travel abroad. And I think that is the first step we're going to get into before you get into the fully automated and connected city where you basically have the autonomous vehicles running everywhere. But it is true. People are talking about it, and I think it is a really, really interesting concept.
Cool. Leading on to that question, I guess we want to know a little bit more about sort of what that would mean from an infrastructure perspective. So, in your vision of what the future holds for this autonomous vehicle space, how much of what exists in today's infrastructure can be used and be a part of this vision of the future that you have, and how much would have to be completely rehauled? And maybe you could say a little bit about what does that mean for resource productivity and externalities like CO2 and raw materials that might be embedded in these new objects.
I think up until now, the focus has very much been on the autonomous vehicles themselves and not so much about infrastructure. You have to keep in mind that the engineers that I'm working with are basically based at the different vehicle manufacturers, or Audi, BMW, Mercedes, Opel, and all the rest of them. They have special people looking after this specific technology. In order for that to get fully integrated into the city and for the city planners to fully understand what does this actually mean in terms of our city planning in the future, there's still a step to go. We've now just started talking to the different infrastructure providers because for sure the infrastructure will have to change. I've also seen models from OECD, by example, where they predict how this is going to look like in 25 years from now and what the cities are going to look like. And for sure, if you apply the full range of autonomous vehicles on demand for a city, it will have an impact. I think Joe started by saying that it could lead to less parking spaces, it could lead to more green areas, it could lead to less roads, and basically make the cities a bit more livable in that sense. In order for that to happen, we need to get down to the traffic engineers, the traffic management engineers, the city planners that are sitting in the different municipalities. And while we're doing it on the vehicles levels today, it's a relatively small segment in the market that are doing this. But getting down to every municipality across Europe, it's a bit of a task. So I think we have a bit of way to go before we get this thinking embedded into the mindset of the city planners.
Thanks, Rasmus. Paul, I just want to bring you into the conversation here and just start with a broad question here. What excites you about autonomous vehicles?
A great deal. So thanks for having me today. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll share some slides with you and just very quickly take you through why I think this is a big deal.
Yeah, so I think we have your slides on screen now.
Okay, so first of all, we've got to understand exponential progress. If you'd have said to me 40 years ago when I was in the school playing ground, oh, you're going to have the world's information in your pocket at a moment's notice and cat videos, I just wouldn't have believed you. But we're going to see the same level of change in the next 8 years. Software's touching things, and progress is going to go exponential. It is exponential, but we're really going to appreciate that in the next few years. These autonomous vehicles, one other important thing to note about them is that they can take any platform. So once we've developed an autonomous system for one vehicle type, we can put it across the board from shuttles to pods to big trucks. The next future mobility have got pods that combine into road trains, which I think is a game changer. We can have sidewalk friendly delivery robots. And there's going to be huge impacts, and we've got to understand this is a $10 trillion mobility market. That's some 5 times bigger than the smartphone market. Safety, we're hoping that autonomous vehicles reduce crashes by about 80%. And given that about 1.2 million people die on the roads every year globally, that would be an incredible human benefit. And crashes cost developed nations full percentage points of GDP. So just on the crash side alone, then we can save, in Canada we worked out we'll save about 500 million hours of time lost to driving. Rasmus mentioned the shared transportation as a service or mobility as a service, on-demand mobility. That would be amazing. And Morgan Stanley estimated that the global savings will be about $1.3 trillion a year for this technology. The when is really important. We've already got people like Ford and Baidu saying that they're going to be mass producing these vehicles by 2021. So it's coming really quick. We don't know what Google's plans are, but we know that they're looking for people to build these modules. They've got job adverts out. And we've had the first taxi trials started in Singapore and in Pittsburgh with Nutonomy and Uber. So it's coming really quick. And then we've got these existing business models, taxis, car rental, car share, ride share, transportation network companies like Uber. They all have their own business segment at the moment, but once you get this transportation as a service where you call up your vehicle on demand and then pay for electronically, suddenly these are all competing in the same space. So you've got a $10 trillion market, and then you've got this massive competition going on. And this is going to really be a big deal for I've called them the forgotten 30%, those that don't actually have driving licenses. So those that are too young, disabled, seniors, medically at risk, too poor, suddenly they will have much better access to the road network via this transportation as a service. And for me, another really important thing to understand is congestion and public transit. Currently, during the typical rush hour peak period, we have about 1.2 people per vehicle, which is a terrible waste of our resources. But once we get to ride sharing of shared fleets, and say we get a figure of 1.8 people per vehicle, suddenly that's 30% vehicles on the road moving the same amount of people. So we get efficiencies in cities. And this becomes the public transit that public transit now has always wanted to be. It becomes on demand, door to door, as opposed to fixed routes, fixed schedule. So it's going to disrupt our whole public transit system. And then it's important to understand that autonomous vehicles aren't just moving people and goods, they're also moving services, and they will perform services as well. And that's something that's not getting a great deal of discussion. And one of the key things about those services is our privacy just goes out the window, because there's not only the privacy and the data on the trip that we're making in these vehicles are seeing everything around them. And so it's easy to find out where people are going, what they're doing, how they're moving about, how things are changing around the city. So fascinating. I call it data heaven and data hell. So we've got all that to look forward to. And so if an autonomous vehicle, and this is really key, this is a unique product. We've never had a product like this before that just by owning it will make us money. So we can just sit back and make money. And the thing is, the automakers aren't going to give away this goose that's laying the golden egg, or the people that are making these autonomous vehicles. So they're going to provide this transportation as a service via fleets. And like Ford's announcement, Ford won't even be selling their autonomous vehicles to the public when they first become available. So we've got to understand that private car ownership is going to disappear. If private car ownership doesn't disappear, then we end up with this dystopian situation where we'll have more and more vehicles on the road, more traffic, more parking, more emissions. And we'll have a utopian if we can get this ride sharing implemented, push autonomous vehicles and ride sharing like transit. And we've got to understand this isn't the only technology in town. There are loads of other technologies going to be affecting our lives. And so, like the smart city, let's get this into context. And so to just sum up, autonomous vehicle will be moving goods, vehicles and services. It will make money for its owner. Demand will be greater than supply for this tech, so there'll be very rapid market penetration. It will be disruptive. So hopefully there, I've given you a few of the key points that I think this technology brings.
Thank you, Paul. And that you did outline, on one hand, a very compelling vision for where this technology is taking us. But I would say maybe to someone who owns a classic car or enjoys the art of driving, doesn't this all make it a bit less sexy? We're talking about going from an age where car design was a big deal, people enjoyed performance cars, to something that on what might seem to some a bit less creative, less beautiful, and more mundane, a bit grey?
Yeah, I just say that how much time do you actually enjoy driving compared with how much time you stuck commuting? I'm taking my kids around at the weekend, doing all that driving I don't want to have to do. I think it's going to free up more time than the time that people will feel they've lost to the art of driving. And hopefully we'll have tracks set up and we can have track days and people can still enjoy doing their own driving, but for the mundane stuff, let's get that automated, let's get it safe, let's get it electric and efficient.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I mean, in your presentation, you touched a little bit about about what some of the players are really in this market, and you spoke about Google, and it's true that you think of Google actually as sort of at the forefront of this industry, and a lot of the media they come up and the work that they do there. But somebody said something quite interesting to me yesterday. Maybe Rasmus, you have some ideas on this, and that's the future of the market, or the big market holders of the future in this space, are going to be people who have or companies who have the best algorithms. And in order to get the best algorithms, you need to have user data to plug into it. You need to be able to collect it and plug into your algorithms to make them better and better, essentially. And in fact, even though Google is the biggest data company in the world, probably, they don't have any user data really in this space. So a company like Tesla, which already has lots of cars in the market collecting this data, is probably going to be at the forefront of the autonomous vehicle sector in the future. Would you agree with this? And could you just talk about that a little bit?
No, you're absolutely right. There are going to be new players in the market in the future compared to the traditional vehicle manufacturers like General Motors and all the rest of them, for sure. And I do see that understanding user behavior and the data is key in order to make this work. I also know from our point of view that the traditional vehicle manufacturers are gearing up. They're all throwing an enormous amount of resources after this. And you can say they're sort of coming from two different sides. So you have the Googles and the Teslas and those guys in the world that comes from the algorithm, from the software world, where the others are coming from the manufacturing world and actually producing a car that works. And I think, with Tesla, with prolonging their, launch of the new vehicles several times, now that it seems like it's going to be here, I think they're faced with other challenges. So I think actually some of the best corporations you will see in the future is if some of these guys would team up. And I think because there are so many different expertise in the two different worlds, and they do need to come together at some point in order to deliver one of the best products. But just going back to what Paul said for a second, if you allow me, I think one of the things that we're also seeing that's going to be a game changer in this whole industry is the shared economy. You have it in context of Uber, you have it with Airbnb, where people actually make business without owning anything. And if you look at some of the studies, you can see that from the cars, and here I fully agree with Paul, that is only actually used about 4% of the time. That's enormous waste of resources just parked somewhere and not being used. You already see service coming up where they actually share their private cars. Those things are popping up left, right, and center in Europe, and I think that's the first step towards getting into this world. Two other things I want to mention is we've also done a study in Europe where we actually see that the younger generation, there's not as many people who turn 18s who is actually keen on taking a driver's license. And they're not so keen on which car they own. They're much more interested in getting from A to B the most quick and the most efficient way. We've seen several examples of this. Another example of the shared economy is in Estonia, for instance. In Estonia, you actually buy your parking space outside your house. But when you take your car in the morning, you drive to work. That means that parking space is free. And now I've seen an ad last week where you can actually sell or rent out that parking space that you bought during the hours where you don't use it. So the whole shared economy, I think, is going to have a huge influence in the mobility market itself.
So these ideas maybe not coming together just yet, but on the brink of something. We're going to pick up a bit more on some of those points you've both raised in the first half of the session. But first, we're going to tell you a bit more about what's going on at the DIF. And I was speaking with Rose Ely a few minutes ago. She thinks she's watched more DIF sessions than anyone else around the world at this year's DIF. If you think you've watched more sessions than Rose, tweet us, tell us how many DIF sessions you've watched, and challenge her claim. But now, over to you, Rose.
That's a rather big introduction to go in with, Joe, thanks. So it is the last day of week 2 today, but as always there is still lots more to come, and we have handpicked just a couple of sessions that you might want to keep an eye out for if you're enjoying this session. So coming up at 2 p.m. GMT is a video filmed at the Biomimicry and Bio-Inspired Innovation Conference, which took place just a few days ago in the Netherlands. And following that session in the DIF studio later on today at 3 p.m. GMT is A Different Path, presented by 3 speakers who have a wealth of knowledge in how modern technology is being applied in low and middle income nations. Interestingly, they can have the upper hand in developing a more robust economy by learning from the mistakes of highly developed nations. And of course, there is always loads to catch up on. So if mobility is your thing, then why not watch our Ellen MacArthur Foundation stage from yesterday, Innovation Based on the 4 Elements. This session is inspired by Tech Week, who challenges designers to create innovations based on fire, water, wind and earth. And lastly, I know we always say it, but we really do like to hear from you, our DIF audience, and Twitter is one of the easiest ways you can get involved. So tweet us at @thinkdiff_ using #thinkdiff. And here's a member of the DIF audience who did just that and has now got themselves a top spot in a DIF live session, and it really could be you. So that is all from me, and it's back to Inina and the DIF's second most handsome host, Joe.
Thank you very much, Rose. We'll speak in a few moments after this session. I will grill you on that accusation there.
Who is the most handsome DIF?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. We'll have to schedule another session next week to interview Rose on that topic.
And maybe you guys could tweet live on
Maybe we get
your
one of
vote.
our Twitter polls going. Good point.
Yeah, so actually we have another question that follows on quite nicely to what Rasmus was talking, and I think when you talk about sort of the sharing economy and the future and sort of what the impact that would have on the economy, it begs the question. You can't really go around the idea of the impact on human labour, basically, or the future of work. And so we wanted to ask Paul, what your insights would be on, given that maybe one statistic that we have said that in the future, only 10% of the cars that we need today, we would actually need in the future. And in that world, all those people working in the manufacturing sector and in the maintenance sector for that sector would be different. So the question is, what kind of skills do you think that the average the average human would need in the future of a city that's run by autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, speaking to the whole question of employment displacement, here in Canada, 1.5% of the workforce drive a big truck, and I can certainly see in 15 years' time those jobs could potentially be completely obsolete. They might have moved to being chaperones, but they could be out of work, and there's direct impacts on people who work already in the transportation sector directly as drivers, insurance, legal people around crashes. Then there's the ripple effects. You've got people in healthcare. Perhaps a quarter of the people in an emergency room at any one time are there because of car crashes. It's the ripple effects on are just going to be felt throughout the economy. And whenever we have discussions about autonomous vehicles on the forums, it inevitably leads to this jobs disruption of how do we prepare for this. And this is just part of a much bigger move throughout the economy where automation, robotics and artificial intelligence is basically taking our jobs. And the thing about, and this has happened throughout history, so this is nothing new, but I think the big difference with this time is that the rate that technology is growing, if you remember my exponential slide that I started with, is so fast that actually our jobs are being taken away, and the automation is replacing them faster than we can retrain. And this is the thing. So any conversation about autonomous vehicles and jobs displacement, to my mind, we need to talk about a new societal construct. Basic income is one that I've heard of that seems to make some sense. I'm no expert in it, but we actually need to think about a new social construct. And so there's going to be all sorts of new jobs in this economy, but many of the new jobs that are going to be created will be replaced by automation and artificial intelligence before we can respond. So it's a good question, and a huge one that I think this entire conference theme is covering.
Definitely a thought that's a bit frightening to some, I think, and that's partly why this subject is so frequently in the news. And another example of how even something as grand or a massive subject as mobility and transport, the real question could be even bigger as well. It's a systemic issue. I do want to reiterate to the audience watching at home, this is your chance to get involved with the diff, so do send your questions in. You can add them to the comment section just below the live stream player that you're watching us in now, or you can send them to us on Twitter using hashtag ThinkDiff. The lovely Colin is looking out for those throughout the remaining 20 minutes of this session. Do send them in for Paul and for Rasmus. I just want to take a small break to show you another way that you can interact with the Disruptive Innovation Festival. If you tuned in at 1:30 yesterday, you'll have seen our Interactographics session, Colin Webster and myself giving you a rundown of a set of interactive infographics that you can find on the Diff website. So they're really easy to access. You just head to the Diff homepage, thinkdiff.co. There's a button on the homepage, it says Interactographics, a fantastic title, I think you'll agree. Just one click on that, and it'll send you over to this page where you can see 5 different interactive graphics on all different sorts of subjects: the business of tomorrow, future of learning, regenerative cities, disruptive technologies, and one that I want to look at right now, transport of the future. So if I click on that, you will see this lovely infographic with lots of different innovative technologies associated with transport. If you hover over, you can see these throbbing circles just on the infographic. They mean that someone's commented on the image. So you can see down in this bottom right-hand corner, there are loads of people looking at this right now. Some of them have commented, so let's scroll down and see what's going on. We need some more comments on here from the Diff audience. Down here, so autonomous vehicles is what we're talking about right now with Paul and Rasmus. And there's a number of different subjects, such as what will we lose out on if we never drive again? And 2 comments on that. Someone said, I guess we need more driving grounds where people drive for fun, which is exactly what Paul said earlier with some track space.
Yeah, Disneyland.
Disneyland for cars, you think?
Yeah, maybe.
Fantastic. Someone has also said, ride shares are really nice, getting to know people and sharing assets. We'd miss out on that connection. It'd just be about getting places efficiently. And Colin's chipped in, that's fine, but it's the same thing on a train, bus or aeroplane, isn't it? Don't worry about that. So loads of things that you can comment on here. We do urge you to come and add your voice. The elephant in the room, maybe that would be a good one to put to Paul and Rasmus now. So someone has said that the elephant in the room about mobility is that we might be spoilt with the level of mobility we become accustomed to, especially in the Western world. Potentially from a thermodynamics perspective even, so much movement would just explode energy needs, even if met by renewable energies. Paul or Rasmus, do you want to take that one? I think it's alluding to some of these rebound effects. If mobility and transport is so easy to come by and so convenient, will we just start travelling more?
Rasmus, you first.
Okay, I'll chip in first. Well, that's definitely the evolution we've seen in the last 10 years, that the world has become smaller because mobility is a lot easier to come by. I'll give you an example. My parents moved from the north of Denmark to the south of Denmark, which is about 200 miles away, in 1976. And their parents, my grandparents, thought it was a huge effort to drive down and actually see them. I then, a generation later, I moved to Brussels. And as what I understand, the distance is actually the same in their mind. So they would come down to see me, I would go back home to see them just as often as they would. So for sure, in the last 20 years, we've seen the world becoming smaller because mobility is much more easy to come by. One other thought, though, in terms of the electromobility, so if you're talking about electrical cars, I think what we have to remember is that the infrastructure, so the power plants and everything else, is not actually geared today for all the vehicles to become electrical. I think you'd find, and they asked some of the experts, that the electrical grid would actually break down. I think the numbers is all the way down to between 10 and 15% of the vehicle park becoming electrical. So it is not an isolated incident. Here I fully agree with what Paul said before. It's a ripple effect. When we start changing things in the mobility sector, it has a ripple effect on so many other different things. But just one comment on the autonomous vehicles in terms of, yes, we need a lot less cars and maybe there'll be fewer production. I don't actually agree with this, because if you have a system where autonomous vehicles is available on demand, that means they will be driving a lot more than just the 4% that the cars are driving today. That also means the lifespan of autonomous vehicle might be all the way down to 3 years before it has to be replaced. So yes, we have less cars, but I also think you see a change in the car park much more rapidly than you do today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, to go back to your comment on the ripple effect, we were wondering if you could comment a little bit on what your thoughts were around the effect that autonomous vehicles would have on business models, namely maybe perhaps the supply chain of business models, and do they or will they, in your mind, in your opinion, and play an enabling role for something like reverse logistics operations, which is sort of relevant in the circular economy context?
Oh, autonomous vehicles have a profound effect on business and operational models. I mean, car parking is a fantastic example of that. At the moment, one of the biggest problems in developments, one of the biggest problems in cities is car parking. And if we do have autonomous vehicles that are being used efficiently in ride sharing in shared fleets, so rather than sitting idle 95% of the time, we're maybe using these vehicles more than 30% of the time. I think that's a realistic figure, but we may get it even higher. Then that immediately changes the need for parking and the infrastructure for parking, and that changes literally the business and operational model for a city. And so, and the whole supply chain. Autonomous trucking, we worked out that you save 40% of the cost of a truck by removing the driver, and you can use the vehicle about 42% more because there's no driver and no working time regulations. And so one amazing thing is we could reduce the size of these trucks because the truck axle loads are one of the biggest things that degrades the pavement. It's the weather and the axle loads that destroy pavements, and that's the biggest cost for transportation in North America, for instance, is maintaining roads. So there's so many ways that operational and business models get disrupted by autonomous vehicles. We need to think differently.
Maybe a comment from my side, if you allow. I think that technology is really great, and I think there is huge potential in the autonomous vehicles. But I think the biggest hurdle for actually introducing autonomous vehicles and all the things that we've been talking about is twofold. One is it's the average John Doe who needs to generate trust that the autonomous vehicle will actually work and brake and get him from A to B. And the other part is our politicians. Getting them, get the legislation, get the legal framework ready to allow autonomous vehicles to driving around. I know a lot of countries are looking at this at the moment, but I don't think technology is going to be what slows the evolution down. I think it's human and the legal framework.
Thanks, Rasmus. I'm going to go back to our Interacto graphic now, where there's been more comments coming in. Just a reminder, if you're just joining us or watching on Catch Up, you can find these graphics on the homepage. Just click Interacto graphics on the page you're on now. Perhaps one of my lovely colleagues will add in the link to the graphics. I think they might have even done that already. Very proactive. So down here, there was one point I wanted to pick out from the unanswered questions about autonomous vehicles, and it was one over here. Are humans really better at making decisions about unexpected events on the road? We're thinking crashes, aren't we, really? So trying not to hit a deer can result in crashing into another car on the other road. Any thoughts on that, the moral dilemmas that have captured people's interest about autonomous driving?
Yeah, okay, so this is a big concern for a lot of people. And just to give that some context, So in North America, around in the US, around 35,000 people are killed on the roads every year. I would suspect the number of incidents where there was actually a moral decision being made that still resulted in that person dying is very, very small. Most of us just get into a bad situation and there's nothing we feel we can do about it. Whereas these autonomous vehicles, they're looking 360 degrees around themselves, 10 to 20 times a second. They react quicker than a human can do, and they're actually being programmed not to get into situations where they're likely to have a crash. So first of all, I think in context, it's a really small subset of the problem. So we've got to understand that yes, there will be moral and ethical situations, decisions to be made by these vehicles, but it's a very, very small figure, and we've got to look at how many lives we can save compared with this issue. And one day this issue will be really important. I just think with 35,000 people dying on American roads alone every year, then we've got to get that in context and think and balance out. You know, do we want to take advantage of this technology now and maybe reduce crashes by 80%, or do we want to wait until it's going to be 99%? And whilst we wait, another 100, 200, 300,000 people will die. So it's we've got to balance.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think one thing that really fascinates me is the who. Like, obviously these algorithms have been programmed to mitigate risk and to make, the best possible decision that they've been programmed to do. But who's actually developing those? What values have actually been embedded into these objects? And as a society, are those values sort of something that we all share? And so it's a very interesting subject. But I'd like to ask another question about something that you never normally hear in this discussion, and that's what is autonomous vehicles. Is that something that will remain within the urban context, or will it also, filter out into the rural regions and play a role there in the future?
I mean, from my point of view, I think some of the first use cases, if you will, would be the rural areas. I mean, again, to use my example before, if I go back to see my family in Denmark, I drive through 4 different countries, and it's going to take me 8 hours. 2 o'clock in the night on the German Autobahn, I would love to be able to take my hands off the steering wheel and sleep for 3 hours while the car does its thing. And then I wake up later. So for sure, I think there is a big use case on rural roads and the motorways.
Interesting.
Yeah, and in the farming community, they're some of the first users of this technology. And again, it's all a case of incremental development. This tech at the moment is safe for private land. Very soon, it's going to be safe for public roads, and we're going to find use cases everywhere. And it's just like the internet, just like the smartphones, just like the apps on the smartphones. We're going to find uses for this tech that we never imagined now. And the rural situation, there's going to be just as many uses as there are in the urban situation.
I just want to return to this very interesting point about values and who's embedding values into the system and the algorithms that drive these autonomous vehicles, if you excuse that terrible pun. We had a comment coming in from Interactographic saying that I've heard stories of Uber not picking up passengers with a low rating. So the question here is who or what controls who cannot hail a ride? Will access to mobility be determined by your credit rating? Someone's accused this commenter of having a poor rating, and it's all got a bit ugly in the comments here. But this sounds a bit Black Mirror, doesn't it? It's if you've got a low rating, you're not getting picked up. There's a chance for some real prejudice and inequality to come in here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's we're going to have each municipality is going to have to put in place regulations and bylaws to ensure some level of equity with this technology, and perhaps we're going to have some fallback, smaller fleet run by cities, which ensures that everyone has access, even if they don't have a smart device, even if they have no money, even if they don't. Even if they're going to leave it in a mess. So, we're going to have to hope that society puts regulations in places to ensure equitability.
I have to admit, through my discussions with many different municipalities across Europe, because of this mobility as a service initiative that we're trying to roll out at the moment, the public transport operators, they really see the operation of trams or metros or buses as a civil service. It's really something, it's a service they provide to their citizens. And I don't think that specific service in its broader context will disappear. The way it's performed might change, but there I fully agree with Paul that there will be something that will be offered by the local government in order to ensure that people that with less means or no drive license or whatever it is will still be able to get from A to B.
Thanks.
Thanks. And we have a couple more questions left, and this one's for you, Rasmus. What would you say that the top 3 values would be that would be embedded in autonomous vehicles and the algorithms of autonomous vehicles? So something like perhaps the 10 commandments would be for Christians. What would your top 3 values be in the algorithms in autonomous vehicles?
Well, I fully share Paul's view before in terms of safety is definitely at the top. Whether it's 1, 2, or 3, I don't know, but it's definitely at the top in terms of reducing fatalities in
For human life. Yeah.
the human life. Yes, exactly. The other one is the use of our infrastructure in the cities by making them more livable, by reducing the space for driving, for parking, for the space that they actually take up. So I think that's another huge value in terms of livable cities, if you will. The third one might be the economy, because I think it will be more and more moving towards a shared economy where we don't actually care so much about owning the car, but we care much more about getting from A to B. So the convenience for me as a person, I think, will increase.
Thanks, Rasmus. And one final question for you, Paul. In your bio and at the top of the session, we said that you have this dream of going around North America, chasing the weather in an autonomous RV. How close are you to achieving that dream?
I'd say I'll be able to do that within 8 years.
Nice. Where are you going to go first?
Yeah.
Well, obviously Alberta in the summer months is beautiful and great, but yeah, during the winter months I'll probably be down Florida, California, just following the great places. And there's going to be entire communities joining me. You know, we're literally going to have the dentist, the doctor. All of these people are going to be in these communities, but every society and every culture has them in their history, and this technology is going to. And why would I pay huge amounts of money for living somewhere and taxes when I can just get in my vehicle and just go enjoy the continent?
I have this
I'll be the first one to join you, Paul.
Yeah.
I have this image of a flock of cars just going...
All heading for Alberta.
Yes, the dentist, the family doctor, everybody all going
It's
down.
a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
And with that really wonderful image in our minds, we are drawing this session to a close. But thank you very much, Rasmus and Paul, for joining us and answering so many of our great questions, both from Anina and myself and from our audience online as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
There's loads more to see at the diff. Rose, the diff extraordinaire herself, gave a rundown of some sessions you can see, but remember, you can always head to the schedule pages or the catch-up pages to see some of the sessions that are coming up or that have already passed that you missed out on at the diff. Remember, you can access the Interactive graphics via the homepage at any time. Just click the nice big button for Interactive graphics to add your comments. You didn't miss out by not participating on this session. These are going to be up for the rest of the diff, so make sure to make yourself heard there. But for now, thanks for joining us at the Disruptive Innovation Festival, and we'll see you again next time.
See you next time.